And with just a few hours left in 2018, Virginia Tech was unable to continue its winning streak that leads the nation and has now ended. But going down to the wire against a 10-2 Cincinnati team, losing in the last couple minutes, 35-31. We've got Mike McDaniel on the line from ESPN Blacksburg. Of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, which we bring you discussion, debate, and analysis each and every day. Mike, Happy New Year, and hope you had a great Christmas.
Yeah, Christmas was good, Mark. Thanks, and Happy New Year to you as well.
So let's go to the last drive. Of course, Cincinnati scored. They basically, with Mike Warren and company, Hayden Moore at quarterback, the RPO was working, and they just ran it down the Hokies' throats. Virginia Tech had a chance, got the kickoff to the 30, got a couple first downs, bailed out by a pass interference, but Ryan Willis throws the costly pick as he just kind of hoped with the fade pass down the left sideline.
Yeah, it's, story of the season for the Hokies, really. You look at offensively, when the passing game's been clicking, they've kind of fallen in love with it. What ends up happening is they throw a lot of these fade passes, and we've seen that a ton. They have some tall, athletic receivers for the first time in a really long time, and because of that, the offensive coaching staff has really loved to throw up those fade passes, and it helps when you have a quarterback like Ryan Willis, who for much of the year since taking over a quarterback for the injured Josh Jackson has been really, really good at throwing the fade. So you see a quarterback coming in, stepping in, who could really throw a fade pass well, and then you have some tall athletic receivers. It's easy to fall in love with it when you get up in a matchup against smaller corners. Well, Virginia Tech fell in love with that again today. They went away from the run largely in the fourth quarter. Deshaun McLeese did not have a single carry in the fourth quarter of this game, which is very puzzling to me, considering the fact they had 13 carries for 102 yards in this football game up until that point, and wasn't really featured at all in the fourth quarter, which is really interesting. But that's really a synopsis of this entire year for the Virginia Tech Hokies. I mean, Deshaun McLeese had a really strong opening to the season against Florida State, was the focal point of the running game in that upset in Tallahassee. But he had some fumble issues against William & Mary, and that got him in the doghouse, and he wasn't really a guy who found himself squarely in the running back rotation for the rest of the year. McLeese was a guy who, did continue to play, but he was nowhere near as featured as he was in that opener against Florida State after he fumbled against William & Mary. It seemed to really get him in the doghouse, and he had a hard time digging out of that. So he was featured once again today, had a lot of success in the running game because of that. Mark, as I've talked about with you numerous times, Virginia Tech really hasn't had a strong rushing attack since the 2011 season when they had David Wilson. They made the ACC championship that season against Taj Boyd and Clemson. That was a really strong year that they had. Virginia Tech's only 2 losses that year came to Clemson, one in the regular season and then one in the ACC championship game before ultimately losing in the Sugar Bowl. And Virginia Tech had a really strong rushing attack then, but ever since then, they've really struggled to run the football. They've had numerous cast of characters from J.C. Coleman to Trey Edmonds to Marshawn Williams, Shy McKenzie. The latest, of course, is now Deshaun McLeese, Stephen Peoples. You had Sam Rogers, who graduated last year. So, Virginia Tech's had a lot of really good quality players at running back since David Wilson, but they haven't been able to run the football like they once were able to under Frank Beamer. And it's been a major issue both in the latter years of Frank Beamer's tenure at Virginia Tech, but also in the first few years here for Justin Fuente at Virginia Tech. And I think that's a major reason why the Hokies struggled a lot of the year. The inability to establish a running game and the inability to have a consistent passing game behind backup quarterback Ryan Willis was a major reason for their demise, at least on that side of the football.
I do trust Justin Fuente. I trust him to run the program. I trust him offensively as an offensive mind, but it does seem a bit odd that in a game in which your defense played well at times, but generally was being chewed up, that you would want to keep them off the field, and you had a known commodity in running Deshaun McLeese, and it seemed to be to the left side over and over and over and over, and at 7.8 yards per carry, the last I checked, that was pretty good. And as you mentioned, 13 carries for 102 and no attempts in the fourth quarter. So we mentioned the last series, Ryan Willis throws the pick. They had a shot with about 90 seconds left to drive the field, needed to score the touchdown. Where I really thought they lost the game was with about 8 minutes left, with the lead, driving the ball at will. The offense looked very good when they were running and passing, mixing it up. Ryan Willis running the RPO well, and throwing a ton of slants for big yardage and good completions. they get into a 4th and 1 situation, and the play gets blown up, and they could have went up by 2 scores with 8 minutes left.
Yeah, I loved the decision to go for it there. Virginia Tech actually had an opportunity earlier in the game on 4th down and relatively short, where they elected to kick a short field goal to make it 17-14 at that time to take the lead. That was fine, but I would have liked to have seen them gone for it there. So I think the right call was to go for it there in the spot that you were referring to with less than 9 minutes to go. So Virginia Tech could have made a 3-point lead, a 10-point lead at that point in time if they put the ball in the end zone there. And the way Cincinnati was having, not trouble moving it. They moved the ball up and down the field on the Virginia Tech defense most of the afternoon, but digging yourself out of a 10-point hole with about 8 minutes to go would have been a tall task with a backup quarterback, for as well as Hayden Moore played this afternoon. What was interesting there was Virginia Tech elected on 4th and short to line Willis up under center, which hasn't happened very often this year. I think obviously it's the right decision to go under center in a 4th and short situation, but it seemed to have messed up his footwork a little bit. He came out of that play action pass there, which, by the way, was the right call. In my opinion, you had 2 receivers running wide open. You had Damon Hazelton sprinting towards the end zone, and you had Dalton Keene, who was running kind of a flat route short there, but would have had more than enough to pick up a 1st down. You had 2 guys wide open. Everybody bit on the fake for Cincinnati. Virginia Tech, of course, Ryan Willis has trouble handling the snap, and he's faced with a heavy pass rush there. And that's part of the reason why you did have those 2 guys wide open. So Willis unable to get that pass off. He ends up fumbling, and Cincinnati recovers. We know what happened from there. They eventually go down a couple drives later and score after exchanging some punts. But Virginia Tech had their opportunities to put this thing away. And in my opinion, you're right. That's where the game completely changed. You have the ball under 9 minutes to go. You have all the momentum. You're driving right up and down the field. You have an opportunity to put it away there. And like I've seen and said so many times this year, both on this show, Mark, and I've said on the radio multiple times, Virginia Tech's offense has had a lot of trouble making that big play to put the game away all year long. And when you have a young defense that's struggling to find their footing, which is, let's face it, this has been one of the worst defenses that Bud Foster has had in his 30 years at Virginia Tech. When you have that situation kind of brewing all year long, you need your offense to make a play to help the defense out. And once again today, we were unable to see the offense make that one big play in a crucial spot to put the game away. And because of that, you put all the pressure on a young defense, and they ran right up and down Virginia Tech's throat there in the final 7 or 8 minutes of this football game. Primarily in the middle of the defense, where the Hokies missed Ricky Walker today. Ricky Walker started out playing the game, but ended up getting hurt I think it was midway through the first quarter, and didn't return. And they really missed him in the middle of the defense today. But, the Hokies had their chances to put this thing away, but you got to credit Cincinnati. Hayden Moore came in. His stats weren't great. He was 11 of 25 for 120 yards through the air with an interception. But he really kept the offense afloat with some big-time runs. He had 64 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. Michael Warren was huge today for Cincinnati, 166 yards rushing and 2 scores. So the Bearcats really made their way on the ground. Obviously some really tough conditions there at the Military Bowl in Annapolis. They had driving rain for most of the day, so passing yards were at a premium. But you got to credit Cincinnati for, gutting this thing out, getting the stop when they needed to, and then driving down the field and making winning plays down the stretch, something that Virginia Tech really wasn't able to do all year long.
Joined by Mike McDaniel from ESPN Blacksburg, and Virginia Tech going down to Cincinnati 35-31 in the final 90 seconds of the game. And, of course, Virginia Tech had the longest streak of winning seasons, 25 consecutive winning seasons, gunning for 26, and made the late rally against Virginia and against Marshall to get into this position. Had the game in their hands, but let it slip away in the rain. And as Mike mentions, Michael Warren, a guy who ran for 1,100 yards and 17 touchdowns for the Bearcats, big in this one against Virginia Tech. And Hayden Moore, not your garden variety backup in that he's thrown for 6,500 yards and 42 touchdowns in his career, just lost the job. And based on his passing, we could see why, but still a capable backup who's going to grasp the offense and run the show and not make too many mistakes. I flip it to the other side in regards to quarterback play. There were long stretches of this game, Mike, that I was very impressed with Ryan Willis, but the last couple drives, he made some poor plays, just underthrowing guys a couple different times. And then the final throw, I know that he trusts his guys, and that's part of an offense when you think you have mismatches on the outside and can take advantage. But he threw it late. The safety came over, made a play on the ball. that wasn't a difficult play to make, and it just was late and underthrown and cost them the game.
Yeah, and he got bailed out a couple plays before that. He threw an interception and it got overturned because of pass interference. Ryan Willis was pretty good for most of the day today, but this is kind of the story of the season. Once again, for Virginia Tech, you have quarterback play that's good enough to get the job done, and then you have some play calling that kind of goes away from what the strength was for most of the game. Now, I understand with a minute 20 to go and 2 timeouts, you got to throw the football. I completely get that. It was the drives leading up to that where Virginia Tech kind of bailed out on Deshaun McLeese and what was working that I have a problem with. Ryan Willis, when he gets in predictable passing situations, he has a tendency to look down the receiver and not really scan the defense. And, we've seen at points this year where he kind of locks into one guy. That one guy, for the most part, has been Damon Hazelton. And Damon Hazelton had an all-ACC year because of it. He was second team all-conference at receiver for the Hokies in his first year with the program. But what you see when things don't go your way is that Ryan Willis has a tendency to lock down covered receivers. And we saw that down the stretch. He throws the one pick that gets overturned that was in double coverage. Then you have, the interception that you referred to at the end. Willis was not great in the fourth quarter. He did have that rushing touchdown. I can't remember if that was early third or late fourth quarter, or late third quarter or early fourth quarter. He had that touchdown run to put the Hokies back up, and he was having a great game at that point in time. But you look at the play calling and how things became a little bit more one-dimensional late, and Ryan Willis's productivity there down the stretch declined because of it. So I think the play calling goes hand in hand with that. Like you said, fade passes aren't going to get the job done. That's been kind of the MO for the Hokies offense all year. Fade passes are a low percentage play. When you have tall athletic receivers, I get the idea, but they're throwing those constantly. I mean, it's almost like at times the Hokies, kind of abandon passing in the middle of the field, which is kind of beyond me considering the speed that they have at some of the slot receivers. So interesting, precarious play calling, to say the least, down the stretch. It's been a story all year long for the Hokies, and it's interesting to see where they go from here because there are definitely changes that need to be made on offense heading into 2019 if they want to have any more success, because this defense will get another year older, Mark, but they need to tackle better. That's a given, and they likely will get better because Bud Foster, it's very rare that he has 2 bad defenses in a row. But you look at the offensive side of the football, and there are a lot of question marks on that side, despite everybody that they have returning.
Cincinnati, meanwhile, moves to 11-2 to cap off a fine season. Considering Luke Fickell took over this program a year ago, went 4-8. I had a chance to talk to Luke Fickell at the American Conference Media Days, and he certainly talked about his tutelage under Urban Meyer, how much that helped him, and the 1 year that he had as an interim head coach at Ohio State. And even though it was a difficult season and going 6-6, that he learned a lot from that in regards to running a program, and then obviously learning from one of the best over the past 5 or 6 years. And quickly he goes from 4-8 to 11-2. And they were a pretty legitimate 11-2 for a group of 5 team in which they were able to play against some of the decent teams in the Power 5 range. And Cincinnati next year, listen to this schedule, Mike. They've got UCLA out of the gate. They beat the Bruins by 3 scores at the Rose Bowl. They've got UCLA coming cross country to Cincinnati. They've got Ohio State in Columbus. They've got Miami of Ohio, and they've got a pretty decent Marshall team that won a bowl game against South Florida.